The Russian Revolution wasn't just a sudden uprising. It was a seismic shift that changed the course of history and shaped the modern world. Beneath the headlines of overthrow and chaos lies a complex story of political intrigue, desperate poverty, and fierce ideology. In this video, we'll uncover the real events and key players behind a revolution that toppled a centuries-old empire and gave rise to the Soviet Union. From the struggles of everyday people to the ambitions of powerful leaders, this is the true story behind one of the most dramatic upheavals in history. Today, we will talk about the true story behind the Russian Revolution. So before we get started, make sure to hit that like button. Also subscribe to my channel. A country on the brink. At the dawn of the 20th century, Russia was an enormous empire stretching across two continents, rich in natural resources, but riddled with contradictions. It was a nation of extremes, vast wealth and crushing poverty, modern cities and backward villages, industrial workers and serfs. The Russian Tsars, members of the Romanov family, had ruled autocratically for over 300 years, claiming divine right and absolute control. But beneath the surface, discontent was simmering. Russia's population was mostly rural and poor, with millions of peasants eking out a harsh existence on land they did not own. The feudal system had only been officially abolished in 1861, and land reforms failed to provide meaningful relief. Peasants were burdened with heavy taxes and limited political rights. Meanwhile, rapid industrialization was creating new social classes, an urban working class living in overcrowded conditions, often exploited by factory owners. The gap between the ruling elite and the masses was staggering. Political opposition was growing, but it was fragmented. There were liberals calling for constitutional monarchy, socialists advocating for workers' control, and revolutionary groups pushing for a complete overthrow of the system. The secret police, censorship, and repression kept dissent under tight control, until it didn't. The impact of World War I. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 was a turning point for Russia. At first, many Russians rallied behind the Tsar, motivated by patriotism and nationalism. However, the war soon exposed the deep weaknesses of the Russian state. The army was ill-equipped and poorly led, and casualties mounted at an alarming rate. Supply shortages, food crises, and inflation worsened daily life for ordinary citizens. As the war dragged on, the government's incompetence became glaringly obvious. Tsar Nicholas I insisted on maintaining direct control over the military despite lacking experience, and he ignored calls for reform. The hardships on the home front, combined with military failures, eroded public trust and intensified anger toward the monarchy. In Petrograd, now St. Petersburg, workers, soldiers, and peasants began to organize strikes and protests demanding bread, peace, and political change. The government responded with arrests and violence, but repression only fueled the fire. The February Revolution. By early 1917, Russia was on the edge of collapse. In February, March in the modern calendar, a massive wave of strikes and demonstrations swept through Petrograd. Women textile workers took to the streets demanding bread, joined by thousands of other workers and soldiers who refused to suppress the protests. The unrest quickly spiraled into a full-scale revolution. The police and military units tasked with controlling the crowds began to defect or join the demonstrators. The Tsar found himself isolated and powerless. Under immense pressure, Nicholas I abdicated the throne in March 1917, ending more than 3 centuries of Romanov rule. A provisional government was formed, composed largely of liberal politicians and moderate socialists. It pledged to establish democracy, continue the war effort, and implement reforms. But it faced enormous challenges. The country was exhausted by war, food shortages continued, and radical political forces were gaining strength. The rise of the Soviets. While the provisional government struggled, workers and soldiers began organizing themselves into councils called Soviets. These Soviets were grassroots assemblies that demanded real power and representation. The largest and most influential was the Petrograd Soviet, which quickly became a center for radical socialist ideas. One group in particular, the Bolsheviks led by Vladimir Lenin, saw the provisional government as weak and illegitimate. Lenin argued that the Soviets should take power to end the war and implement socialist reforms. His famous slogan, "Peace, Land and Bread," captured the desires of millions. The Bolsheviks gained support among workers, soldiers, and peasants disillusioned with the war and the government's inability to address their needs. They promised an end to Russia's involvement in World War I and the redistribution of land. The October Revolution. By October 1917, the Bolsheviks had grown strong enough to act. In what is often called the October Revolution, they staged a nearly bloodless coup in Petrograd, seizing key government buildings and arresting members of the provisional government. This was a radical and unprecedented moment. The old order was overturned, and for the first time, a self-declared socialist government claimed power. The Bolsheviks promised to pull Russia out of the war, redistribute land to peasants, and transfer control of factories to workers. However, this new government was immediately faced with enormous obstacles. Civil war erupted between the Bolsheviks, Red Army, and a coalition of anti-Bolshevik forces known as the Whites, which included monarchists, liberals, and foreign powers. Transforming society. Despite the turmoil, the Bolsheviks set about transforming Russian society. They nationalized industries, introduced centralized planning, and attempted to eradicate the old social hierarchies. The Orthodox Church was stripped of power, and political opponents were suppressed. Lenin's vision of a communist society clashed with realities on the ground. While some peasants benefited from land redistribution, others resisted collectivization. The economy struggled to recover, and dissent was harshly punished. The global impact. The Russian Revolution's impact extended far beyond its borders. It inspired communist movements worldwide and sparked fears among capitalist nations of a similar uprising. The Soviet Union became a key player on the world stage, influencing international politics, especially during the Cold War. The revolution also forced a re-examination of ideas about governance, social justice, and the rights of workers and peasants. It challenged centuries-old notions of monarchy and aristocracy and introduced new debates about how society should be organized. What do you think of our video? Let me know in the comments section below. Before you go, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.